Well, you've had a lot of schooling, Jim. 4 years at Virginia Tech, and then beginning graduate school in education, and then into 2 more years of schooling in mortuary school.
Yeah, some folks might say I can't make up my mind, but it's just such a caring industry, and
it really is. Obviously,
that's why I gravitated towards it, and still in essence, I mean, I love the funeral business.
Oh yeah.
Even though I'm not involved directly with waiting on families, I'm on the wholesale side of it, so I get to, instead of working with maybe 80 or 90 families a year like I did in the funeral business, I can work with 170, 180 professionals,
who are constantly waiting on families. Yes. Share with viewers about Batesville. Obviously, we've got highlighted here on the screen territory manager with Batesville Casket Company. What is Batesville?
Batesville is headquartered out of Batesville, Indiana. It's a 132-year-old company. It's been around a long time.
Right.
They're the world's largest casket manufacturer.
The world's largest, not America's largest, but the world. Wow. Do you have? Does Batesville have a lot of clients around the world?
Some in Russia, especially in the Ukraine area. Australia, France.
Just on volume, y'all are the largest. Yeah.
Right. Most of our largest percent of business obviously comes from the U.S. and North America, South America.
Sure.
Mexico, Canada. We have a couple of plants in Canada, a couple of plants in Mexico.
And I think I saw in visiting the Batesville website that it's part of the Hillen brand, that brand that also makes Hill-Rom.
Right, the world's largest hospital bed manufacturer.
Right.
And the main plants for Hill-Rom are in Batesville, Indiana. We do have a plant in Charleston, South Carolina, that makes the little critical care Clinitron bed for severely burned, traumatized patients. And it kind of keeps a patient suspended so they can heal underneath without having very unique. We had to fight long and hard to get the patent for that.
Oh, I bet, Jim.
It cost us a lot of money, but anyway. But it's very interesting, the hospital bed end of our business as well as the funeral care or death care end of our
very
business.
Large company right there in Batesville, Indiana, and that's I believe it's two publicly traded companies, Hill-Rom and Batesville Casket Company. Now, Batesville does more than just caskets, right?
As far as, we do basically anything dealing with the funeral industry.
Anything in the industry, right?
From, memorial urns to urn vaults to handling materials that a customer could use with family grief materials, brochures. We work with several grief counselors dealing with families or helping funeral directors who want to deal with that grieving end of the business to help their client families face the reality of death and help them cope with their loss, afterwards. A lot of funeral homes have a post-care, service
aftercare,
aftercare, and we, of course, there are a lot of companies that do, that will assist funeral directors, not just us, but we feel that's an important part of funeral service.
Oh, very definitely. And the great thing is now, so oftentimes funeral homes are having a lot of that information on their websites. I was recently at goldfinch.com, the website for all of their properties, and they've got a lot of tremendous information on their downloadable forms and otherwise, cremation forms, Veterans Administration forms, but also that aftercare process. And great operators, same thing with McMillan Small in Myrtle Beach, Lee Funeral Home and Crematory. I think we talked about Shannon Graves here, whose family is in the McKenzie. A lot of funeral homes have websites. Watson, exactly.
Funeral Service there.
I don't mean to leave any out. I saw that Ruse Mortuary and recently has hired a new
Ms. Latimer, Ms. Edna Latimer.
I hate to even begin mentioning any because I'm sure I'll leave a bunch out. Probably some of your clients. I got to be careful. But these websites have a lot of great information on them, oftentimes that are very important. They highlight the aftercare as well as the pre-planning process. For the operators you're dealing with, a lot of them are just trying to make sure that folks recognize, much like the life insurance business, you don't want to think about it, but you need to think about it.
Yeah, a lot of funeral homes have really got some pretty enhanced websites to where families can go online and sign a register book or send an acknowledgement card. They can even order flowers.
Order flowers, yeah.
Get directions if they're from out of town. It's just a lot of good services that funeral professionals provide.
Oh, yeah.
You know, for their clients.
Jim, how has the industry changed since you got in it? I don't want to say almost 40 years ago, but I think you mentioned off camera in 1970.
Right.
Is that the year
I started?
that,
I was still teaching school, but working, kind of getting my feet wet in the industry, so to speak, in the death care industry. I can remember in 1970, the funeral home I was at, we had unit pricing as most funeral homes had.
Yeah.
And what unit pricing is, it's where the funeral director would group all their cost, their overhead, their embalming, their cost of the casket into one single unit price.
Right.
If you walked in and you would, and quite often you wouldn't really explain what that unit price entailed, because most people would want to get into a showroom or selection room and get out.
Right.
Being in a room full of caskets is not the most comfortable environment for people. And
even though that's what you're obviously moving, that's the product you move, but you recognize that.
Give you an example of how uncomfortable people. I remember getting on an elevator at a convention that had Batesville Casket Company, and these people were on there and they just said, "Caskets, ooh." I said, "No, it's gaskets." They said, "Oh, gaskets. Oh, okay." It's like it sends such a negative vibe to a lot of folks when you even mention the word. And a lot of it, psychologists say. My brother was a clinical psychologist before he died. Psychologists say anything that we're not familiar with or don't know don't know about or aren't unsure of, we fear it.
We're fearful of.
And that's what death is. I mean, because we have our faith that promises
oftentimes
us,
guides
people, and it guides people, but
even then, still,
it's
there's
still
got to
tough
be,
because you don't know exactly 100%
it is faith,
for sure.
Right.
And so people are fearful of anything they're not comfortable with or unsure of.
Yeah.
And a casket obviously reminds someone of, I assume, of our ensuing demise, when no one lives forever.
Right.
And that's, so you can understand how people feel. I mean, I didn't think about it because when we were young, and I was very young back then, we don't even think about death. So caskets didn't even bother me. Right. It's just when you get a little bit older and you realize, we don't live forever, even though 18 and 20-year-olds think they do.
Right.
Then that's, it can be a very uncomfortable environment.
And being the father of 3 daughters who span those ages in the early 20s to the early 30s, I guess, around that same, not to date you there again, Jim, but ultimately you have to say, girls, y'all need to think about this as well. Mm-hmm. You're young, but you need to think about it. You don't need to worry about it. You don't need to spend a lot of time thinking about it, but you need to recognize it.
But your question earlier about how has it changed, basically everything was unit priced.
Right.
And then what happened was our industry, there was a Jessica Medford that wrote a book about the death care industry, and she really lambasted our industry because a lot of folks, they would go into a funeral home, and if they saw a $2,000 unit price on a casket, they would assume that $1,500 of it was profit.
Right.
When in actuality, it's nowhere near that.
Right.
So with the advent of the Federal Trade Commission, they were just like 3 years in the making of this, with a lot of people were brought into, I think Senator Grassley headed it up. But there were a lot of folks were brought in and testified about their experiences. Come to find out, our industry has one of the smallest amount of complaints based on the total amount of contacts that funeral professionals have with client families throughout the year. If you take the 2 million times and then equate that to the number of complaints, it's one of the smallest of any industry.
That's tremendous.
But anyway, that's the federal government in their wisdom, of course, got involved in our industry and regulated it to the point that you have to make certain disclaimers to families. You have to use a certain format in your pricing.
Oh, yeah.
The Federal Trade Commission requires you to price your services separately. Tell your families what it actually costs you to put on a funeral.
Like a cafeteria plan, even
right,
for sure.
And then break it down, and then price the casket separate from that.
Right.
And what it did, funeral homes didn't realize, but when we were under the unit price concept, about 25% of all funerals that were conducted at a loss. In other words, when you unit priced at $1,595 funeral, you didn't realize you were losing $400 or $500 because it wasn't covering your overhead.
Right.
And you say, why is that? It's not really a problem, but it's just the nature of our industry.
Oh, yeah.
The average funeral home in the United States does approximately 70 traditional or 70 calls or contacts, or handles 70 loved ones' remains a year, and that's not very many business transactions to spread fixed cost out of it.
Jim, I hate to say it, we have run out of time, and we have got so many. Yeah, you're looking at me. This hadn't been 25 minutes, but yes, it has. I'm sorry to say. So many more questions we want to get into. We're going to have to get you back another time. Would you be willing to do that? That's great. Jim, thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Absolutely. I appreciate the invite.
Stay tuned to more Carolina People with Jim Bowdre of Batesville Casket Company coming up next. You heard Jim talk about some of the cost in the industry, in the funeral home industry. How do people pay for those services? How do you go about? There's a lot of answers to that. We even think about the embalming process. What is it? It may sound very foreign, maybe something you don't want to hear about. Coming out of Jim Bowdre, I think you'd want to hear about it. Also, how has consolidation impacted the industry, and what's the future of the industry? We're going to have to get Jim Bowdre back another time to break those down. Hopefully, you got a lot out of the last 30 minutes. Jim Bowdre, making a difference every day.